So I'd like to start today's webinar and welcome all our participants and our speakers here. Today's webinar is an unusual webinar for Fidelio, Governance, the Arts and Reimagining the Future. And I'm in conversation today with Nica Burns and Dr. Harry Brünjes. Fidelio's focus is very much building boards fit for the future. And this theme, Governance, the Arts, Reimagining the Future, is core to our purpose. And I'm delighted to welcome today two leading lights of the West End who will enable us to rethink what the future in this grim time could look like, but also take us through what they've been through over the past 6 months or so. And three of the themes we'd like to explore today are the governance of crisis, the economic and business model of the West End, and how business leaders can reinvent the future. It's therefore my great pleasure to welcome Nica Burns, who's the Chief Executive and co-owner of the NIMAX Theatres, and Harry Brünjes, who's the chair of both the English National Opera and the London Coliseum Theatre. And I'd like to start with Nica. Now, Nica is well known, very well known, is the theatre in the West End. But for those who are perhaps less familiar with the West End, just to summarise, a multi-award winning producer of over 100 productions, artistic director at the Donmar from 83 to 89, and production director of Stoll, Moss and Really Useful Theatre Group, before founding the NIMAX Theatres in 2005. And just to put that into context, these are the theatres: the Palace, the Lyric, the Apollo, the Garrick, Vaudeville and the Duchess. So I'd like to begin with going back to lockdown.
I think for those of you that may not be conversant with the business of theatre, it would be quite useful for a moment just to put it into context in terms of what was it like immediately before lockdown. Well, it was just fantastic. Theatre has grown and grown and grown in the UK. It's the last 10 years, last decade, has been a golden age of theatre. In 2018 alone, we played to a collective audience across the UK of 34 million people. Now that is about the same number as everyone that went to football matches, whether it was Premier League or English Football League matches. That's how big it was. Ticket sales generated £1.28 billion in revenue, and the cultural sector as a whole contributed £32.5 billion to the UK economy. In 2019, London's theatres box office took £800 million, and we gave the Treasury a very big VAT check of 133 million. So we do pay our way. That's a lot of performances. 2019, ticket sales up again. Every year in the whole of the 2010 decade, we grew more successful, more people came, we sold more tickets. And at NIMAX, we're very pleased that we've been doing over 85% capacity over all our theatres for the last 3 or 4 years, which is quite something when you have those very, very rainy Monday nights. So we now have at least 300,000 people visiting a West End theatre in a normal week, 15 million people a year. Theatre is a major reason why people come to the UK and to London. And every pound spent at the theatre, £3 is spent on food, drink, accommodation and travel. Well, in Sheffield, in London, of course, it's more like £30. So we give a lot of support. We fill cafes, restaurants, bars and hotels around our areas. We're really important. And people should remember that we're not just a great success artistically. We are really good at what we do. We export our theatre everywhere, and we bring income to every single city where the local theatre is at the heart of it. That was Saturday, the 14th of March. Now, what happened on the 16th of March, actually, that was the day it was in abeyance, we didn't know. I was opening a new show. It was a brilliant show, City of Angels, at the Garrick Theatre, directed by the wonderful Josie O'Rourke. It had a stellar cast. It had taken me 5 years to get that cast together. And at 5 o'clock, I'd been down to the theatre in the afternoon before the preview, had come back to the office, and there was a statement by Boris Johnson, which was on the lines of, you shouldn't be gathering together, don't go out, don't go to theatres. Theatre owners, you know what to do. What? We didn't actually know exactly what we were supposed to do. So we went to the Society of London Theatre, our industry organisation, and they went to the DCMS and said, what does this mean? Can we play tonight? And about 6 o'clock, we got the answer, no. During that time, the City of Angels cast was sitting in the Garrick Theatre, listening to the statement on the tannoy, and they simply didn't know whether they were going to get to do their preview that night or not. Across the West End, actors were getting into their costumes, the sound checks had taken place, we were ready for performance, and the audience was starting to arrive to pick up their tickets before they went and had a drink or whatever they wanted to do coming in early. And it was the most painful moment, typing out the notices that had to go up at the front of the theatre saying, ladies and gentlemen, there'll be no performance tonight as Prime Minister Boris Johnson has closed us down. And the actors were absolutely distraught. And Josie O'Rourke said, well, we need to have a drink. So we opened the bar, and we rang the other company that I was also producing. Everybody's talking about Jamie the Apollo, and said, come down to the Garrick. And we literally, it was like how I imagine when the Depression happened and everyone was going mad. We had an impromptu party. They drank the bois dry, and I thought I'd better get some food in them. So we wiped out our local Domino's with pizza, and we had a sort of goodbye. And we didn't know at the time how long it was going to be, but none of us believed it was going to be more than about 3 weeks. And the great Vanessa Williams, who had come, was making her UK West End debut in City of Angels after this illustrious career, actually stayed on her flat. And 2 weeks in, I rang her up and said, I think you need to get home. If you don't go home now, I'm not sure if you can get home. And that was the moment. And I'm sure that every person working that night in theatres all over the country, we had Jamie ready to go in Birmingham. It was going to be their first performance. Again, they didn't know, and audience was saying, just let us in. It was a sold out house. They didn't want to be turned away. So it was a real heartbreaker, and the consequences have been huge.
I hate to use that word, unprecedented, and it does feel a little bit like sort of something that happened in Shakespeare's time,
yeah.
but extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary, and the personal angle as well as the business angle, which we'll come back to. I have just had a request from somebody who's listening to the webinar. Could we speak up a little bit? So this is extraordinary.
So not me.
This is clearly me. I'm
Nica
so
Burns,
sorry.
yeah.
Is this better?
I think
let
so.
us know.
Yes, please do let us know if there's a problem.
Yeah.
And now I'd like to, thank you very much, Nica. I'd like to turn to Harry. So Harry is chairman of the English National Opera. An interesting background, 10 years as a medical student entertainer, and then a physician for 15 years, followed by 15 years in the city, and for the last 10 years associated with the English National Opera. And so Harry, perhaps in the same vein, can you talk us through what happened at the ENO?
Well, I've just never seen Nica Burns work to a script before, so this has thrown me.
Just some statistics.
I know,
Harry.
but it was impressive, Nica. To sort of plagiarise what Nica has done, a little bit of background in English National Opera. The company has existed since 1931, created by Lillian Bayliss, and for the last 50 years, in fact 52 years, has been our London home has been the London Coliseum, and which I must say, with Nica here, who owns so many theatres in London, we are the biggest theatre in the West End. We currently have a capacity of 2,360, but we can increase that if needs must. And being a publicly funded, well, half publicly funded, we're hybrid now, we're publicly funded and half commercial. We have, besides the performers, the principals who visit the company, we have 350 staff based between the London Coliseum Theatre and our rehearsal rooms, Lillian Baylis House in West Hampstead, which some of you may or may not know was the old recording studio for Decca. And that's where all the Beatles used to record and Frank Sinatra, etc., many years ago. So what happened to us? The announcement came from the Prime Minister at 5 o'clock on the Monday. And I suppose just to preamble that, where were we just before on the Saturday night? We just opened a new production of Marriage of Figaro at the London Coliseum. Any opera in London or anywhere in the world which you see on the first night is the end of, at the very least, a 3-year journey, if not a 5-year journey. The planning is enormous, it's detailed, it's forensic. Opera around the world is cast 3 years ahead. We were extremely thrilled by Marriage of Figaro. The London Coliseum was heaving on the Saturday night. Stuart Murphy, the chief exec, gave a speech on the stage before the production, and then I spoke at the post-show party. There was an extremely vibrant atmosphere, but nevertheless, there was this sense of unknowing. None of us knew what was going to happen. We were due to open another opera that Friday of a new production of Rusalka, which also had been 5 years in preparation and had been in the rehearsal rooms for several months before the lockdown on the Monday. Boris Johnson spoke at 5 o'clock. Stuart Murphy rang me. Audience was starting to arrive. And there we closed the London Coliseum. Stuart Murphy closed the London Coliseum. It wasn't even closed for this length of time in the Second World War. It's not fully mothballed. We've had 5 security staff in the theatre all year, but it was a bizarre moment. And like Nica said, we thought maybe 3 to 4 weeks. Yeah. We sent the staff home. Everybody ran for home. We secured the theatre, ran away, and we just thought this will be one of those things which happens. We were resilient about it. We thought 4 to 6 weeks, and in show business parlance, we thought the show would go on. And here we are now 6 months later, and to plagiarize the famous lyric of Irving Berlin, there is no business like show business. In fact, there's no business at all. There has been no business in the West End of London and in theatres around the world for 6 months.
So Harry, I'd like to pick up on some research that we conducted a couple of years ago, and we'd asked leading chairmen, how they prepared their boards for disruption, and Harry was one of the chairs that we interviewed. Well, when we were talking back in 2018 of all the types of disruption that we'd imagined, this was not on the radar screen at all.
No.
And so maybe just coming back to that, as a chair, I mean, you touched upon that discussion with your CEO. As a chair, what do you do in these circumstances?
Well, we've become very focused on governance in the last 5 years. We have all the committees you would expect us to have, from finance to audit and risk, to advisory committees, to artistic committees, and audit and risk has become a core topic. And if anything was at the top of our risk, being the biggest London theatre, literally on Trafalgar Square, we always thought possibly a terrorist attack. And that was something which we had been looking at, talking about, planning, and various strategy away days, and how we were doing, how we would handle that. I think we must be candid. We didn't have a virus.
Nobody did.
Nobody did.
No one thought this could have happened. So.
Thank you for backing
yeah.
And but we didn't. But we went to work, and Stuart Murphy managed superbly supported by a senior management team. His chief operating officer, Karen Watson. And what a time for our new artistic director to only be a couple of weeks in role, Annalise Miskimen. A strange time to arrive at a national, international opera company. And we all zoomed ourselves into paranoia, really. We all the gloves were off, and we were managing and governing round the clock. Emergency board meetings, emergency finance meetings, emergency risk meetings. I created with Stuart a subcommittee of the board. We called it the COVID committee, which was myself, the deputy chair, the chair of audit, and the chair of finance. And we have been speaking and talking and zooming regularly. It was daily at the start. It became weekly. And I'm afraid, which is in a way disappointing, it's become slightly more formulaic now.
I think it was an extraordinary time for governance, and actually I think boards stepped up pretty well in I think the learnings from the financial crisis probably meant that one piece was strengthened. But I'd like to come back to Nica, and you described, I mean, great stats, just, you know, where the West End was in March.
Very healthy place.
Really healthy place. So how have you responded?
Well, we've offballed. We went and we negotiated with every single contractor, supplier. With buildings like these, they're tested all the time, and different specialists are in and out the building. So we sat down, we looked at who we owed money to, we rang them all up, and we asked them to take a cut. I have to say that the support we received were fantastic, because the moment that the Chancellor announced the furlough scheme and said 80%, it provided a bench measure for us, in that it was good to take that as a lead, because it seemed to be a reasonable thing to do, was to also, as a policy, ask people to tighten their belts a bit and for everyone to take 80%. We furloughed our staff really quickly, and on our management team meetings, we had a Zoom call every day at 11 o'clock. And also we made a very clear decision, which was moral, but also a leadership decision, that if we were to lead quite a large workforce, we had at the time our workforce over the group was about 360. We also had 250 plus in the 3 companies of the shows that we were producing. If we were going to lead everybody and ask them to take cuts, ask our suppliers, so did the senior management team and of course myself. And we felt it was important that we took the biggest cut. So we volunteered to do just that. And that way, making the calls, knowing that we had taken a bigger cut, and we're taking less ourselves, actually gave us a very firm base, and we're proud of that. But I also think business-wise, it's a very good and practical thing to do and to be able to communicate. So we were very pleased to have such a universal response. I think out of the number of companies that we asked to join in helping things going, we only had one supplier that didn't want to come to the table. And I think that's pretty fantastic. And there was a real feeling of everybody, pulling together and communicating to our staff, about furlough. The moment you did all that, I do like to communicate personally. Of course, once we furloughed them, that was it, because we couldn't really speak to them much more anymore. But the communication, I think, was extremely important all the way through the company. It's been really tough for the performers, because they are technically self-employed and they don't get anything. They've legal rights in terms of notice. They've got everything they were entitled to, but the future looking longer beyond the first month was frightening. And the freelancers, and who do we mean by that? We mean our creative teams, people in marketing, that all the companies that we work with, other than just our performers and staff, the future was looking absolutely terrible. And they didn't get very much, and it's been a very parlous time for them, and we've been very conscious of that, but there hasn't been anything that we could do. We had to minimise our costs and look forward to how we were going to be managing our costs and our reserves, because we simply didn't know when we could start trading. And as Harry says, no one's earned a penny an income since the 16th of March, and that's a long time, 6 months, to not be able to earn. I'm grateful for furlough, grateful for other things like waiving business rates. Thank you very much. That was when you have 6 major buildings plus 2 support buildings, that's a lot in rates. We're talking big numbers here. But the sheer length of time and the constant uncertainty, I think everybody would have liked more than anything to have got a longer idea as to how long we might be closed, because it's very difficult to plan in a business way when things change literally on a day-to-day basis, and maybe not, sometime, never. That has been, I think, for everyone, we're all in the same boat, really tough. And it's particularly tough also for the regional theatre, because they have to plan far further ahead than you do in London. And the worst thing of all has been is we had this big campaign saying, please don't cancel Christmas. We need to get the pantos up, because the pantomimes in Sheffield and Birmingham and Cardiff, all across the country, they're a third of the income for next year for these theatres. And symbolically, it is a moment when a lot of families take their children to the theatre for the first time, and it's also a community thing, going to a local theatre. So we feel that we have done everything that we could plan to do. And for some theatres, they've been very active in streaming and trying to do what they can on the internet, but that's been very difficult for the West End. And we've been in negotiation ever since, with a lot of discussions with our unions, and I'd like to actually thank and praise them for all the support they've been giving to staff, and also with the DCMS. So since then, we've been working with the DCMS on the different stages of what a roadmap might look like to reopening. And as you all know, recently they allowed outdoor performances in the last month, which has meant there's been at least a start on the road. And the wonderful thing about those is the demand for tickets and seats. And you're going to be doing a car park.
We are. Well, not a car park. The Alexandra Palace.
Yes, car park.
Still a car park. I'm sure they'll not prefer to be called the Ali Palace.
So I mean, obviously, huge response. One of the things, Nick, that would just interest me is the voice of the West End, because in some ways, so well known as, you know, and as a sector. I mean, everybody knows the London Theatre. Did you feel that the voice of the West End was being understood by decision makers? We have a really good trade organisation, Society of London Theatre, with a very strong management and board, for which I'm a former president myself. And the political voice started quickly with Julian Bird, our chief executive, being the conduit to which we talked to the DCMS at the start, because they needed one voice. We also had key people who were transmitting the message publicly in terms of TV. I think radio and press, we did have good voices. The voices were all on the same page, which is important, but there was only so much that we could say in terms of knowing so little. And as time has evolved, our leaders have stepped forward. And I have to say, one of them, I'm sure everybody will have heard speak so brilliantly and be so proactive, is, of course, Andrew Lloyd Webber, the fellow theatre owner. I've been quite active. I think you've got around a bit, Harry.
Then I can get a word in.
Yeah, sorry. We have been vocal, and we've been on the same page. Yeah. But we are one industry amongst a whole load of sectors. Everybody's been affected. So we weren't crying as one industry. We stood together as an industry, side by side with the rest of the country, because we were all in a boat we never expected to be in.
No, and I guess the point you made about so many freelancers as well, perhaps the structure was what outsiders hadn't really thought about so much, but came to light with this particular sector.
And in some ways, I think are freelancers where sometimes you're on long contracts in, say, a West End show or perhaps in the chorus of but you are actually technically self-employed, so you couldn't be furloughed. They fell through a lot of the gaps, and there was some support, thank you again, Chancellor, for lump sum payments. But for the young people that were starting, you had to have tax returns. And our leading man, for example, we had a new leading man, Jamie, 20 years old, Noah Thomas, still at college when he got this prime, massive leading role, didn't have a tax return. So someone like Noah Thomas was getting nothing. And there were a lot of them in the same boat. So it's very difficult to know for them how to support them. And then we have to thank Sam Mendes for standing up and forming the Creative Artists Fund and getting £500,000 out of Netflix. And then a lot of people have now joined that, and Society of London Theatre is administrating it. And now actually, we have raised a significant amount of money, but it's £1,000. And in fact, I saw Sam yesterday, and he said that the £1,000 to these artists has made a huge difference. I mean, they've had the most wonderful letters. So we've been very good at helping our own. We want to do more because it's not enough, but we've been going for it.
Thank you. And so this is the commercial theatre, and E&O obviously is a public institution. So Harry, can you talk us through?
Well, we were a public institution, we still are, but our financial modelling changed 5 years ago. As a company, we've become hybrid. So we will run opera at the London Coliseum for 2/3 of the year, approximately, and then the rest of the third we go into competition with the commercial theatre.
Yes, actually, we've noticed that change. I think it's outrageous.
And
I'm just joking.
And we have a big musical. So in the last 5 years, we're Glenn Close and Sunset Boulevard, Alfie Boe and Carousel, Michael Ball and Chess.
I've seen every single one of them, Harry.
Because I invited you.
No, excuse me, I paid for my tickets every time.
And the first
they were fantastic.
And we had Emma Thompson in Sweeney Todd, which was the first. But your question was publicly funded. Yes, we are, and we're very grateful to the public fund from the Arts Council, / DCMS as well, so it was a decision led by Stuart Murphy at the theatre and Annalise and Karen Watson that the first thing we must do is honour all the contracts of all the shows which were played through the end of the season. So we paid everybody through to the end of the season as if the season had run. So I thought that was a remarkable thing that the E&O did and led on at the time. But as Nica says, furlough was a magnificent thing. For the E&O, for NIMAX Theatres, for my own companies, my own commercial businesses.
For the whole country.
For the whole country. We, at the beginning, as a board, we were doing all sorts of contingencies and planning before furlough appeared and how we're going to get through. One thing which we've been resilient on the last 5 years is our reserving policy. We've strengthened our reserves, we've held the reserves. We have sort of 3 cohorts of reserves. One is the London Coliseum. My title is chairman, but the theatre's been there since 1904, and I view myself as a custodian in a way more than a chairman. So we have a large amount of money attached to that as a reserve, publicly funded, just in case there was a force majeure, and here there is one, we would have the funds to close down and never open again. So we have that as well. And of course, West End of London is an unpredictable world, even in good times. Yeah. So therefore, you have to have money in case some shows just don't work. Yeah. But I use the word unpredictable. Everybody say, I'm just like Nica. People keep saying to me, "What's going to happen?" And I say the only thing I can predict is unpredictability, and it changes every day. Throughout the summer, we produce so many contingencies, so many start dates, so many spreadsheets. As I said many times, we now have more spreadsheets at E&O than we have music scores. We have done so much planning, so much preparation, but it has been tough. And just to reiterate, the furlough scheme was significant. We furloughed 80% plus, I think not probably greater than that, The management team who stayed, they all took, and I won't embarrass them by saying how much, but they took a significant pay cut over a period of months just to make sure that the E&O was doing right by the company, doing right by everybody.
It's also a principle, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a principle.
To lead,
It was correct. You know, we're a well-known institution, we're a major institution, the Arts Council, and we wish to be seen, to quote Terran Trafficking, we wish to be seen to be doing right. Finally, on this final bit here, if anything, we over-communicated. We had just set up a thing within the company workplace Facebook, which has been a wonderful tool to keep talking to all 350 employees. Stuart Murphy speaks to the company every Friday. I gave a couple of webinars to the company throughout summer at appropriate times, just to make sure that the board weren't silent. So I think we've communicated well. We communicated with all our patrons and our supporters and our financial supporters. As you say, a lot of conversations with management, with all the supply chains and all your stakeholders. And on a broader thing, if we move on to we all have an international footprint. I've been speaking to my cohort, my peer group, my chair at the Met, chair at LA Opera, Sir Clive Gillison at Carnegie Hall, because this is, you said unprecedented, it's unprecedented on a global basis, isn't it? So it's made us, often in the world of show, we tend to be quite accessible and affable, but we're quite clever, we're quite guarded, we keep our secrets. But in fact, we're all in this together, and I've found it's made us all a lot closer because we all have the same thing to talk about. We're all desperate to open our theatres.
Exactly, in a strange sort of way, this world of sort of Zoom.
Yeah.
And I'd like to come to reimagining the future. I mean, this is obviously about the arts, this is obviously about the theatre, but I think we're also, you know, the extent of the reimagining, the extent of the business challenge, we're all hoping that others can learn as well. So Nica, what can you share with us about how you're thinking going forward, given the hurdles that you've described?
Well, I think what all the theatres have done is stay very close, obviously, with the DCMS, and we're now at stage 4 in the roadmap for opening. We have worked through, I mean, our theatres, each of our theatres has literally a 100-page manual, finished now, photographs typed up, of how we could reopen with social distancing and what an audience and a theatre looks like in the future. Would you like me to go through that?
Absolutely.
So we, from the audience point of view, we would expect you need to come in a mask, mandatory. The way you would queue into a theatre would be different. So we would social distance queuing in, temperature taken. In our theatres, we will use a handheld, like a torch that takes your temperature on your forehead. It's very quick. You don't touch. It's painless. We would we will send you an email for arriving 24 hours ahead, asking you how your health is today. Is your health normal for you? Have you got your sense of taste, your sense of smell? 4 or 5 questions so that you think about it. And take anecdotally, it was very interesting as I sat in every preview of City of Angels, coming up to being locked down when people were already concerned about COVID, was that audiences who were a bit sick, I had a bit of a cough or just a normal winter cold, stopped attending. And suddenly, and I was sitting in the first preview going, what audience aren't enjoying it? What's happening? And I realised it was silent. So people who were sick just stopped going, and we had tickets at the box office that had been paid for but not picked up in a way we'd never had before. And what was fascinating about that was that audiences were already taking some personal responsibility. So when we all go back, as we're sharing spaces, as a lot of people are very keen to do, I think we're going to see the same. And so that's why you ask people just to think before you come, how's your health today? And I think that's one of the biggest messages I give to our audiences who are dying to welcome you back, is that if you're not feeling well, don't come. We're going to help you with that. Because if you email on the email address that we will give to you with your ticket to say 24 hours in advance, I'm feeling sick, we will give you a refund, and you're going to know that in advance. So you're not going to be afraid to buy your ticket and then be afraid that you're going to be sick and lose your money. So I think that's a very clear message we want to give you. And when you get into the theatre, it will have been not just deep cleaned, but it will have been sanitised. So, and what does that mean? Well, it means, imagine in very easy layperson's words, it's like spraying it with a disinfectant. So you'll have a disinfectant theatre. Our job is to provide you with as much as science has advised us is COVID secure. And you need to know that when you come, and we will look after you to make that happen. And we will be doing the same backstage with the backstage areas. I think it's a bit more complicated with very big companies, and we're still working through as to the optimum way to look after our performers and backstage staff. But I think that for the future, quite a long time to come, we will be having audiences wearing masks. We don't know yet when social distancing will be dropped totally. So as the problem with theatre is that it's uneconomically viable for theatres to operate at, say, 50% or less capacity. And for some, it has to be 100%. So just imagine a big machine of a show like Hamilton, for example, or in my theatre, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. The costs of running that every week are hundreds of thousands of pounds. And you simply can't do it if you are reducing your take by so much. For me, my theatres are smaller, and some of my shows are a great deal cheaper than that. So where the running costs every week of the shows are small or smaller than the bigger shows, we will do our utmost to be able to reopen with social distancing. And it's a very, very careful economic decision, which theatres all over the country are looking at as I speak now. A lot of them are just not going to be able to do it. And the tragedy of that is more redundancies. Nobody wants to make their theatre staff redundant. Every time we've had to do it, it is just heartbreaking, because these are relationships. And in many theatres, the technicians have been with the theatre for a very long time. It's a complete commitment. And we are very, very happy that yesterday our main technical union, VEC2, have agreed an interim time where we will slightly reduce some issues, like how overtime works. And everyone is looking as to how we can open. I think that, what we need to do is very seriously, everybody commit to just everyone tighten their belt a little bit. So everybody takes a little less in order for us all to have something. And like we say, I'm not using this as a figure for everyone the way forward, but as the Chancellor said, 80%, I feel that 80% of something is a great deal better than 100% of nothing. And actually, it is a time for everybody who has a part to play, and it's a very big jigsaw, all the people that contribute to performance happening every single night. And I think of it as, how do you walk through a theatre? You have stage door, you then go through into the theatre, you have technical staff and the performers, you walk through, you have all the management, the ushers, the front of house, the bar staff, and the box office. Every one of them, and all the freelancers, from our press officer to our lighting designer, to all the suppliers who supply us our lights, our sounds, they play a very critical part. And I truly believe if we all stand together and do exactly we say, we all take just that little bit less to get it up so we can reduce the costs every week for the smaller shows, so we can open our theatres where possible with social distancing. That is the way to do it. And we are, I don't think there's an industry that is more collaborative than ours, Harry. Don't you agree?
We are, but the other interesting thing.
So we can do it, as
We
I'm
can,
saying.
of course, but
And the pent-up demand it must be there. You know, I mean, and the confidence and trust is important as well.
Yeah.
But yes.
Well,
yes,
I've been
absolutely.
going to the outdoor events, and I went to Jesus Christ Superstar at Regent's Park, sold out. I went on Saturday to see West End Musical live in a car park on an industrial estate in Enfield, packed out with everybody in their cars. I'm dying to get back in the theatre. Perhaps that was not a good word. Sorry,
No.
really enthusiastically wanting to get back to the live experience in a safe way, and that's the
Yes.
point. Yeah.
No, exactly. Thank you. And the E&O, looking
Well,
forward.
the same principle, the show must go on, you know, about Irving Berlin's lyrics. So we are in rehearsal right now, because apparently we're doing a show in a car park.
Yes, which
apparently.
I'm looking forward to attending.
Just some NCP car park somewhere, but
Oh, come on, the alley pally, beautiful car park, but it's still a car park.
yeah, I know. And the
And actually, I think the idea of opera singers coming to the table and playing to their audience in cars is wonderful
well, it's
and
going.
unique.
Well, it is unique. Well, thank you for unique.
Yeah.
It's the first time it's been done by an arts institution in the UK. So,
Well, there you
so
go.
we are the first. 300 cars, and every car will be a bubble. And this sort of transducer will be fitted to your windscreen to promote the sound. Now the tickets are going like hotcakes, so book early to avoid disappointment. I'll just plug in that now. But we in our rehearsal room, we've now got it all squared out. So the singers, I've got these wonderful photographs of all the principals all sat in these 2-meter squares, all rehearsing. Because opera singers can sing, and they can sing very loud, and they can project. So I've had all the complications to do with the projection and water vapor and what's you know the salivary output. I mean that's a challenge. We've had.
Well, that's come through well, though.
Well, it has come through.
Science report saying that you don't actually produce much more than you do speaking, because of course the great thing about singers is that they control their breath.
They do.
So it's all absolutely still. I don't think you'll get much saliva in that.
No, but it brings into play a second word to do with some performance and to do with the public, in spite of all the regulatory, temperature and hand clean and sanitization. The big word, which none of us can put an algorithm against, is confidence. It's the confidence of bringing this audience back. So one of the things which we are planning is the productions which we hope to get away next year, and God, would be lovely even before next year, are the type of production which would have a younger demographic coming to see the show. And some of the productions which may be an older audience, maybe more over 65, over 70, that may be later down the line, because there are people who are just, in spite of everything, are not confident. And that is going to be a challenge, not just for our sector, but for everything.
There'll always be nervousness. And I just want to give a quick shout out, because on Monday night, I went to see the only one that I know about in a bigger theatre is Sleepless in Seattle, the new musical which opened at the Troubadour in Wembley.
Yeah.
And that's a large auditorium, socially did 400 people and a 1,200-seater. The quite a large cast have been all tested. Yeah. They're doing it close to each other, feeling confident, and they've gone through that process. And we were just all so pleased to be there. So it was fantastic to just be in a theatre and see it again.
I'm receiving questions from the audience, so please do send the questions in. We have a little bit of time for questions. I'm going to ask two at once. One is from an audience member who sits on the board of 2 arts organisations, and they've switched to 100% online and found it to be beneficial in engaging with new audiences and community participants. Is this more widely the case, and is there something that can be learned from this? And then the second question is looking at, apparently the Salzburg Festival concluded successfully last Saturday in a modified form.
Yeah.
What lessons can we learn? So 2 opposite ends of the spectrum. Europe, I guess, going back to live performance in a modified form, and then the online model. What can be learned in both directions?
Well, the online model, it depends on the arts institution and what their product is. But myself and Nica are responsible for big theatres. We'd like to have people in the theatres.
I think that the online model has great function and has been very good
And
within
held-
this crisis
held the
in terms
relationship.
of reaching out to people. But I think that some organisations will use that more going forward in our part of the industry, but also in Malmaida Theatre or within the smaller subsidised sector houses. You still need to create something live in the theatre, and it doesn't work as well without an audience with it. Certainly doesn't work for a comedy.
No.
I went to Blindness at the Don Mar last week, which I absolutely loved, brilliant, and we were sitting socially distanced. So I think that there's been a step forward in certain areas with how institutions can use online, but the live experience is never, ever, ever.
And performers give something extra in front of a live audience. I know they can actually do it mechanically and technically and sing and move correctly.
There's something missing.
But when they're out there in front of and they're responding to a sense, to a noise, to applause, it just drives them to a different level.
So I think that taking online forward is great in some ways, but I don't think it is going to replace the fantastic experience from an audience member sitting in an audience and being able to respond to the actors and smelling it all, feeling it. And that there is a special thing about the audience-performer relationship live, and that's never going to be completely replaced. What the online is doing is something different, which is an ancillary or speaks to some people. So live is here to stay, and let's carry on exploring 21st century technology.
And Salzburg is interesting because it has just closed, but of course it was limited in its audience capacity by social distancing. A great deal of it was outdoors, and they're slightly ahead in this COVID cycle. But we will be interested in the modelling. We'll be interested in the financial results.
You couldn't open a big opera in the Eno with, say, a third of the audience there financially, could you?
No.
This is not possible.
No.
Even with perhaps everyone taking a bit less. It doesn't add up, does it?
No, and it never has done over the decades.
And
it's a very expensive art form.
This might be very slightly provocative thing to say, but I'm not an expert on this, but I understand that some countries get much higher subsidy for their opera companies than ours do.
They do.
Have you heard that story?
No, I haven't. But I'll start taking notes, Nica. I'll start learning from you.
Can I open this up? We're actually getting quite a lot of international questions, which is interesting. Can I open this up to kind of where we were talking about how successful London was?
Yeah.
Still is, but or will be
Yeah.
again. But has this impacted London, because of London's success going into this, has this had a greater impact on London because we're slower coming out of this? So relative to other international centres for the theatre, for opera, where does this leave the UK?
Well, I think in terms of that, I mean, just to preamble that, the fact there are all these successful theatres running in the West End brings people into the West End. So the fact that people are not coming in, they're not coming to the pub before, they're not going to the restaurants afterwards, they're not nightclubbing later into the night, the weekends, that the effect of not having open theatres is detrimental to so many other, the whole life of the West End.
Right. I mean,
same for Broadway.
We've had phone calls from our local restaurants and hotels, Restaurants Association, saying when are the theatres going to reopen? And in fact, the clamour right now from other sectors, especially hospitality, within London, is huge. And they're saying all the time, open our theatres, please let our theatres open. I'm saying to you, I want to open my theatres. I want to give employment to my actors. I want to let you back in. And we will work very hard as an industry to do that and make things COVID safe. And the great thing about theatre is that it's ordered. It's not like going into a nightclub, or I look at some of the bars and the restaurants near me now, that since we've had the Eat Out to Help Out campaign, where people have come back massively. It's really successful. The streets are packed with outdoor tables, people dining and drinking, and sitting, in quite small tables face to face. In theatres, we sit side by side. that is one of the best ways to sit. We are completely ordered. The experience is controlled all the way through. It's a very controlled environment, and that is one of the biggest things to make people safe.
Yes, but in the suburbs, what I would say, in the London environment, the people are going out to eat at a restaurant, whether it be down in Kingston or Croydon, wherever. But that is just what they're going out to do. When they come into the West End, they come in to they have a drink before they come in to see the show. There's show before. It's a much bigger experience, and that's why they're desperate. It's tough for the London restaurants, even the famous ones.
I think talking again to the our international colleagues is that, of course, London has a massive concentration of theatres, much larger in nearly all capital cities, with Broadway also putting their hands up for being a major theatre capital. So it's the presence of theatres on the street is huge, and it's very much part of the British cultural DNA. We go to theatre. It's very important to our culture, both in London and also, when they were rebuilding new cities in the sort of 60s in particular, where the theatre was going to be was always on the town planning as the heart of the community. So it's very important, and we have a massively healthy amateur dramatic. People like to be part of it, so it's important.
And if we think about ecosystem, I'm getting quite a few questions about sort of the ecosystem. And Nica, you've described the ecosystem within the theatre world. Have the cuts, has this lasted so long and the cuts already gone so deep that this is going to do lasting damage? Or
well, for example, on that, internationally, the Colombian Music Agency, which has been going, classical music agency since 1930, has just closed.
Well, this is a really distressing thing, because we've had supply companies. One of our set buildings companies has gone out of business. There are people who have closed down their companies permanently because they are not big enough to have big reserves. They can't be closed for 6 months. There's no question of being able to, they haven't got the future orders coming in. So furlough ends in November, but people it's at the end of October rather start. So, but employers are having to contribute more now in September and more in November, in October, and they can't pay them. They don't want to let
costumes, wigs, technical nights, haulage contractors, which take all the shows around the world.
Makeup artists, all the backstage staffs where shows have come as they come out of
theatrical digs around the UK.
Oh, very, very serious. All these ancillary businesses that feed us and supply us. There are, I can't put an exact figure on it, but I would, at a guess, I'd say it'd be something like definitely 25% of them. A couple of our marketing companies have gone bust that we use all the time, but they're small and targeted. One of our greatest lighting designers, Pauline Constable, who got together the Freelance Association, she's writing and saying all the time about the number of these freelancers who will never come back to the theatre, and we're losing real talent. It's absolutely massive. And I'm losing some of our house staff. They're taking other full-time jobs, and people who were actors are actors. I mean, one of them said, well, they've taken a full-time job as a gymnastics teacher. So
it's tough enough to get a job in show business, even good times. No jobs at all.
Yes, no, exactly. And I've just had a question, the return to work. I mean, obviously the government here is now really encouraging people to return to the office place safely, of course. Will that make a huge difference? Because I can see that if people are already in central London working...
Well, it may bring some sort of energy back to London. But the big driver for Nica and for us is to try and get these theatres open again. That's the big difference.
But I think that the key question in there was, do you think people will come back? And
the confidence.
Audiences. I think there's going to be a shift, we have had help now from our technical union, and we're talking to Equity and to the MU, because I think that we're going to be more and more doing Sundays. Now already 4 out of my 6 theatres are playing Sundays, and we do 2 shows Saturdays, 2 shows Sundays, at the matinee and an evening show. And I think the way forward is going to be that model running through. We were the first theatre company to do 2 on a Sunday. The Sunday shows are incredibly popular, and particularly in the matinee, where we have families coming together. So for something like The Play That Goes Wrong, for example, massive success, been running 5 years at the Duchess Theatre. It's a great family show, and those are 2 days where still traditionally most people aren't working. And I think that more and more we will be following that model as a theatre community, where we'll be performing, certainly not having Monday nights off, and maybe Monday and Tuesday nights off together, and favouring the end of the week, because the whole question, isn't it, is really about how much flexible working is there going to be in a wider working community in cities, how many people will be working from home, etc. And I think this shift to more Sundays and emphasis on the West End is definitely going to be a way forward.
And the regions, for us, for example, this summer, which we've had to cancel and hopefully will come back next year, is that we were taking an outdoor opera for free to the children of Liverpool and the Albert Docks. And that this crisis has completely stopped that. And again, that was 2 years in planning. One of our great ambitions is to spread English national opera throughout the whole country. And now again, we've had to regroup and rethink that through.
But that's it, isn't it? That's what we're all going to have to do. Yeah. We're going to regroup, rethink from now, reframe, and we're going to make it work.
Absolutely. And I've got a question, which is perhaps quite, because I can see we're drawing to the close of the webinar, and I've got quite a nice question, perhaps just to finish on. A student has sent in the question: what would your words of advice be to a student in the creative arts whose training, whose study has been interrupted by COVID? What would your words of advice be to anybody right at the beginning of that career journey in the performing arts?
Well, as someone who started off as an actor myself, what I would say, I've always say the same thing: you should never even start your journey if there was nothing, unless there's nothing else you could think of doing. If it's just something you quite like, don't do it. It's hard, it's competitive. If you're still today as passionate as the day you decided to go and train to be in creative arts, hold on to that. While you're not able to train, do a lot of it yourself. Make yourself do a physical class. If you're, stretch, dance if you're a dancer, make yourself do it. Carry on with your voice work. You can do all that by yourself. Join every single thing going online in terms of class. Do not stop the discipline of training for yourself. Keep your goal clear. If you can, start doing things online, just on video, seeing it work with yourself on television, on the screen. Do it. And don't lose sight of the desire and your belief in yourself that you can be a great artist. Keep that. If you don't have that in you, then maybe you chose the wrong thing, because the journey is tough, but when you get there, it's fabulous.
It is. But if I can jump in on top of that, it's tough even in the good times. And you probably don't know, but we're very friendly with Victor Spinetti. I'm sure you remember the actor. Indeed. And he taught me years ago the 3 things you have to learn about show business, Harry, is the 3 R's, which is resting, redundancy, and rejection.
Oh!
And I remember him saying that so clearly. And so, but back to our question.
Can I just say to that student, yes, about resting, not working. Yeah. Yes, about rejection, because every time you don't get an audition, a part after you've auditioned well, it doesn't mean to say you weren't any good. No. It means there was someone that was righter or fitted better than you. Yeah. So those things are true. What Harry is saying there is you have to be very, very determined and totally believe in yourself.
Yeah, and be prepared to take the knocks, be prepared to dust yourself off, brush yourself down, and start all over again. And you have to go there. But I've got 4 children, and they're all in the West End, and this is probably speaking as a parent, and even my own career. it can be fragile. And I always used to say, have an insurance policy. So I made sure all our children were graduates. And going back to when I was messing about in it 30 odd years ago, I knew many actors and performers and comedians on the road who had maybe not big businesses, but they've got a little second income going just to keep themselves going through the pitfalls. They may run publishing companies. I knew people who were writing books. Some of them were polymaths just to try and give themselves the confidence that there is always maybe just some money coming in somewhere.
And a traditional thing that people have done, actors and performers have done, is to have a tea shop or a sandwich shop.
Exactly. Teach.
Also a tough profession right now.
Yeah,
but
no,
yes.
no, that's absolutely true.
No, exactly. So words of wisdom coming from those who've kind of taken the knocks and the blows, but also I think a pathway forward, which has been tremendously helpful, I think, in this discussion, and it's given me sort of confidence that there's a real determination to get the show back on the road. A lot of work going on behind the scenes. Yeah. I mean, the theatre staying dark is just not an option. No. And we need to find a pathway.
And Nica and I are still available for pantomime if anybody out there.
I'm right behind you, Harry.
So if anybody is planning their pantomime this
I'd rather direct it.
We have a very talented cast and here. But
and can we say good luck to all those in the theatre, running theatres, wanting performers, because we could all do with it. But good luck, stay strong, don't give up.
No, keep plugging.
And audiences, we're getting ready for you. Come back.
And on that note, which I hope has introduced some optimism into what's been quite a difficult discussion, but a very frank and open discussion. Really appreciated. I'd just like to thank Nica and Harry for really showing us a way forward from the West End of London. So thank you.
Jazz hands.